Greg, but I don't see
Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to WeatherBrains episode number 831, the pre-show, the magical part of the program where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say from time to time, outrageous things. And everybody's all here already. This is a little different tonight, but Bill wanted a confab 15 minutes before showtime. We had some confidential things to talk about we couldn't put on the pre-show. So
we don't spend enough time doing this show every week as it is.
Yeah. So this is for the 20th of December. This will be our year ender. And then next week we will have a special edition that will be really airing twice. It will air Friday night. We'll have a Friday night special, Christmas Eve, at the same time here, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. And that will be our show for next week. And then we'll be back on Monday night for 2022. So this is our next to the last show for the year 2021. So there you go. It's going to be a good show. This is our annual year ender, which means the legendary Greg Carbon, our old friend, who is just joining us right now, will do his meteorological memories of the year. It's kind of like when I was a kid working at that radio station, New Year's Eve, we do the top 100 countdown of the year. It's kind of like the top 10 weather countdown of the year. So, Greg, can you hear us?
There's always things we don't like.
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. 5 by 9. And I'm the only guy on the that knows what that means.
I know what it means.
5'9".
5'9".
Now, if you're on Morse code, it's 599. But if you're on voice, it's 5'9". So it's 5 by 9. Good signal. Readability is excellent. So we're good. That's an old ham radio jargon.
QRZ, QSL.
Yeah. CQ, CQDX, CQDX. This is Whiskey Oscar 4 Whiskey. Whiskey Oscar 4 Whiskey. And nobody knows what that means. I used to be a contest guy on CW. I mean, I was a madman on Morse code working the sweepstakes every November.
You have the golden fist.
Sweepstakes. Oh, man. I could... I just didn't have the big beam, the tribander,
I never had that either.
Equipment like some of these big contesters had. But even with a limited, setup, I could still work those stations in Japan all night long on 40 meters. If it was open to Japan, if not, I'd use 20. But I love those contests. And if I
still have my Oklahoma call. The Oklahoma Whiskey X-Ray 5, Whiskey X-Ray 5, Oscar Kilo.
Yes. What a great call. Yeah. My original call was WN4SVH. I got my novice. Back in those days, you got an N prefix. Upgraded to general, it was WB4SVH. And then came the specialty calls, and you can get a 2x1 or a 1x2. So I got WO4W. It means nothing. People think it means watching out for weather, but it means absolutely nothing. That was just chance. So
sounds good.
But I've been Whiskey Oscar 4 Whiskey since about 1982 or 3, I think. So
hey, Rick Smith, Bill Murray, good to see you guys.
Hello,
Jennifer.
Good to see you.
Hello, Bob Henson. Can you hear us okay?
Hey, yes. Can you hear me?
Hey, Bob.
Hey.
Sounds really good.
Bob's
way too long since we talked to you, Bob.
I know, at least 7 or 8 years, I think.
Not too long. But you've already been slotted for a show in March. So
fantastic.
Come back and have a fun walk through down memory lane. So just have to confirm that works for you. I think it's March the 7th.
I'm going to be in Italy that day.
But let me change that. Did I say March the 7th?
I'll be back. Assuming, Omicron dependent, but I'll be back around the 20th after that.
Okay. Well, then how about February the 28th? Are you gone by then?
Yeah, I'm gone for like a month.
All right. So let's say you want to do it in April or late March?
Yeah, let's do late March if we could.
Okay. Maybe the 28th?
That should work. That's Monday night.
Yep.
Yeah, that ought to work.
Excellent. That's going to be a fun show.
And
I'm going to tease something tonight that you said in the show back 400, 500 shows ago, 600 shows ago, that nobody caught that night. And I caught it this weekend listening to part of that show.
Uh-oh.
And it really made me go out and do some research. And that led to some amazing serendipity that I'm going to share with James before we go to the recorded segments tonight. So you'll know what I'm talking about when you hear it.
Now, how does this work in terms of recorded and non-recorded and such?
It'll go out live over YouTube tonight and on the live.bigbrainsmedia.com, and it shows on all the digital sub channels on the the local TV station here, and then it'll be released to all the normal podcasting channels later tonight.
Okay, but
and let me welcome our television viewers really quick. It's top of the hour. Welcome to our TV viewers. We'll start the show in a second. But yes, Bob, go ahead. We'll try and answer your questions about.
Yeah, so only a portion of what we're doing right now will be part of the recorded part, or?
Oh, every bit of it will be, except for that pre-show.
Okay. Except when Troy starts cussing, we cut that out.
And that will happen. So
we have a 5-second delay.
You're so nice, James, to about that 5-second delay for us.
No. We call it the Troy delay.
Hi, Shane. Thanks for coming.
Hello there.
Shane, can you hear us?
Yep.
Hey, Shane.
Yes, I hear you loud and clear. Good to
All
be
right.
here.
5 by 9. All right.
Yeah, there've been lots of 5s and 9s thrown around tonight.
Yeah,
Shane.
that ought to be the show title. Is 5 by 9. All right, so let's get this thing started because I don't want to miss anything for the audio segment. So here we go. Record track 1 and record track 2, and here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is WeatherBrains, episode number 831. This is the weekly show that's all about weather, our year-ender Christmas edition. This is for the 20th of December, 2021. It's going to be a special program as always. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We got our mostly our cast of regulars here. I think Aubrey is out, but I see Troy deep in the heart of Texas. Troy, you ready for the year-ender?
Yeah, I am looking forward to visiting with Bob and Greg and Shane and everyone. And 'tis the season. So to look back at, especially at what is the last 20 years that we call 2021.
Yeah.
Hey, Troy.
Yeah.
Do you charge admission to that museum you have back there? Because I'm tempted to come pay admission to go to that. That's looking better and better every week.
Well, it's not. I've kind of gotten tired of doing it now that school has taken a break. I have deliberately not decided to do anything more right now. I'm going to try to do Christmas this week and then get back to what's left in the house. The house is not quite back where you need it to be, but I can live here, and that's the most important thing. So.
If you ever throw any of that stuff away, let me know. I'm coming over there to pick some.
No, we've already rolled 2 dumpsters out of this place. So, and we're not even there yet. But anyway, thanks.
Rick Smith, we missed you last week. Yeah. I know you got a lot to say about the events of earlier this month, but welcome back. You were traveling last week. You were on the road. Good to have you back.
On the road, yeah. We had to go to Nashville and Memphis for a quick trip for some family friends, friend of the family type stuff. But yeah, made it back. I was driving back on Tuesday, and as is often the case when I don't get to be on the show and I'm listening, I'm talking to the podcast, talking to my phone, saying no, yes. So anyway, well, it was a great show. You guys did a really, really good job with that. So much to talk about with that event.
But we do want to hear your input. So just hang tight. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. And I see with my little eyes, Neil Jacobs just joined us. Neil, you are whereabouts unknown tonight. Welcome.
I think he's surfing Lake Erie.
I'm in Charleston. I just drove up from Miami, so I'm at my mom's place. I asked her to stay off the Minecraft, so we'll see.
Yeah, that was one of our show titles from a few weeks ago. That's awesome. Well, we are glad that you are here, Dr. Jacobs. Thank you for. I know that you're probably worn out. That's a long haul. But thank you so much for being here. So let's see. I know that we've got a lot of guests to introduce here. So let me go to Kim. Kim, I will let you bring in one of our special guests for tonight. So go.
Sure. Well, I'm delighted to welcome Bob Henson to the show. Bob is going to help with Greg, just to digest and contextualize some of what's gone on this year. He's done some deep dives into some recent events and just generally wonderful at helping us to bridge the weather-climate connection. And welcome, Bob.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I've been on the show, but it's been quite a while. So really nice to be back.
It's always a shock when our guests come back. It's amazing, but thank you, Bob. We're glad you're here. Yeah, most people get that second invitation. They don't even respond to the email. So that's great. Yeah. Who never heard of you before? All right, Jen. Well, let's let you bring in another special guest we'll be talking to tonight.
All right. Yeah, we received an email from Sean Hammond from WJRS Radio in Russell Springs, Kentucky, with a guest suggestion, and we have brought them on tonight. And we have Shane Hollandy became a part of the first alert storm team at WBKO in Bowling Green, Kentucky. In 2001, he is a member of the National Weather Association and earned his broadcast seal of approval in November 2006. And he's been honored 4 times by the Kentucky Associated Press for Best Weather Anchor in TV Division 2. And we're going to have Shane come on a little later to talk about the events of December 11th. And you have quite the story to share. And so we're excited to talk to you. But welcome to WeatherBrains, Shane.
Thank you, and it is an honor to be part of the show tonight.
And Shane almost sounded sincere when he said that. No, Shane, it's great to have you. Thank you for coming on the show. We are anxiously waiting to hear from you. But Bill Murray, let's bring in another guest who'll be kind of driving the ship tonight.
Yeah, somehow we've been really lucky to have landed this gig every year where Greg Carbon comes on and walks us through the meteorological memories, usually after having shared it at the NWA meeting. And he saves that last slot for us. And, some years, maybe we, get a lesser event, but we really had a huge event this time. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to the man who needs no introduction. He's the Chief of Forecast Operations for the WPC, Greg Carbon. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, panel. I know there'll be a lot to go over tonight, and yes, the December devastation that we've seen is certainly wasn't any question that was going to make it into the meteorological memories of the year. I remember doing the talk for NWA. Essentially, I think Ida had already formed, so Ida did not make it into the top 10 either. So 9 and 2. I'm giving it away. I think we're going to go through in chronological order. Yeah. We'll go through in chronological order. And I know I'm glad to see that we have some guests on to speak about some of the impacts, especially the most recent tornado outbreak, which was striking and brought back all sorts of memories for me, having left SPC, within a few years after the April 27th event. So brought back a lot of memories in terms of nighttime events and long track tornadoes. And I know what the folks at SPC have been having to go through, and also the WFOs. Great appearance by Pat Spoden last night on 60 Minutes. Just an amazing story from a warning perspective, and certainly a lot more to do as far as surviving this one. So we'll get to that. But thanks for having me. And 19th year for meteorological memory. So Troy, it's almost up to the duration of the COVID pandemic at this point. 20 years. Keeps going.
Greg got muted somehow.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
He's muted.
Tell me when to roll it, James.
There you go.
Roll it, baby. Let's roll it. All
right. Let's do this. We will share screen. Oh, can't share screen.
Oh, let me give you the ability to share the screen. That is my fault. Stand by.
James is really stingy with the screen share.
Yes. Now try and share the screen.
All right.
Methinks it will work. And for those of you listening, we know that you cannot see, but we will be very descriptive in what we're talking about.
There we go.
There we go. Bingo.
There we go. Yeah.
We have a winner. Yes. There we go. We are good to go. Now we've lost Greg's audio again.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Talk to us, Greg. You know, it might be a loose cord on his headset mic. I don't know.
There we go. 1 second. See.
Is it back? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That was an odd toggle there as part of the screen sharing. So you can still see the screen, I hope.
Yes, sir. It looks
All
great.
right. So, you know, the National Weather Association has been awfully kind to me and keeps having me back every year. This started as kind of an informal talk. Actually, it started as an informal talk to an AMF group in Omaha, Nebraska, 19 years ago, and I took that to the NWA, and I've been going back ever since. So another review of annual memories, and it seems like as the years go by, and I've been working as branch chief now for the Weather Prediction Center for 5 years. There's some pressing responsibilities in that job, and I have less time to dream about what my memories were for the year. But I try to put something together, generally in chronological order. These are my memories. Your mileage may certainly vary, and you know, they're not ranked in any particular order. Some of them, most of them, you'll probably remember, but others may not be all that memorable to you. So let's get underway here with the show. Memory number 1. February Arctic outbreak. This cold wave occurred across the central United States in mid-February with preliminary, I think at the time I wrote this, preliminary damage losses in excess of $10 billion. This was just a striking series of really coast-to-coast weather systems, each successive system bringing colder air south across the Great Plains and across Texas. I was just down in Texas. Troy, I was just in your neck of the woods. My son was married last weekend, just outside of Boston. And anytime I told somebody I was a meteorologist, that all they could do was relate their post-traumatic stress syndrome related to this event. This affected an enormous number of people in some pretty terrible ways, with power outages for days on end across Texas. Let's see, what did I have here? I did a review of the daily average temperature over Texas using the real-time mesoscale analysis and basically filtering out all the other states. And what really struck me in this review was on Monday, February 15th, 2021, the mean temperature over the 24-hour period for the state of Texas was 12 degrees Fahrenheit. And that, when I saw that, I was like, wow, that is really very low for that far south and for that big a state. So these are basically the daily mean temperatures from February 11th through the 20th. And interestingly enough, you can kind of see where it began to let up a little bit in the southern parts of the state. This is the freezing line here, that light sort of gray blue colors, 32 degrees over the 24-hour period. And then there was another surge and locked in with some snow and ice cover on the ground as well. And then finally, the freezing gave up most of the state by Saturday, February 20th. So this was a truly devastating event, and resulted in a number of studies, including one from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, of which I played a role in providing these summaries for their analysis of the event. And if you look up the FERC's website, FERC, they have just published a thorough review of this event, not so much from the meteorological perspective, but from the power grid perspective. And it is fascinating to read. A lot of impacts here with this particular event, and also maybe bring in Bob here and talk about return interval on an event magnitude if we want. There are some questions. Are we seeing amplified flow regimes bring this type of event more often? Or is this something we may not see again for 50, 100, or ever years away? Appreciate any conversation you want to talk about there.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me was simply how intense this was, of course. I grew up in Oklahoma City, and I have relatives in the DFW area, so just mind-boggling. I was surprised a little bit at how few places set all-time record lows. In most places, there were 1 or 2 events, perhaps, that were colder over the last century plus. But in terms of, as you were alluding to, Greg, in terms of sheer breadth, combined with intensity, combined with duration, this one really seems to kind of take the cake.
Bob, is there any,
And-
do we have, Bob or Greg, on that reoccurrence interval, do we have any ideas? I was kind of thinking this was a 1 in 20 to 30 year event, but I just wonder if we have anything that would back that up.
I'm looking for the years. I had them written down somewhere. There is an event of similar magnitude. I'm not sure about duration that occurred in the late 1800s. It might have been 1899. And then there were actually more recent events in the 2000s. I think 2018 and 2011 both had brief but very cold temperatures, especially across the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so when you average it all out, even though the background obviously is warming, you do see these episodes of Arctic outbreaks occurring. I think you're right. 30 years sounds about right. Maybe 35 or 40 to see something of this magnitude. The big question is the span between those events getting longer? And we just don't know.
Greg and Bob both, I mean, real quick, and talking to folks in Texas, as far as I can tell you that $150,000 worth of that damage occurred under this roof. They're saying that the damage that we saw in Texas will surpass that from what we saw with Harvey a few years ago. Am I correct in that?
I think I've heard similar statements on that, Troy. And when you think about the overall area impacted, that is certainly possible, given the insurance claims probably stretch from the Austin, San Antonio area all the way up through Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston. So you're combining those property losses across a much larger area than what we saw with Harvey, which is really focused pretty much on the Houston area. So I would not be surprised if I certainly would quantify this as the most expensive winter weather event to impact the United States that I know of. Yeah.
Okay, thank you all.
Well, let's move on here. Let's see. The next one is this is memory number 2. So this is March 13, 14, a strong system that brought heavy snowfall to the Central Rockies and adjacent high plains. And again, I think we waited much of the winter before something like this came along, and then Denver measured its 4th largest snowstorm on record. Cheyenne really took the walloping, though, reported its heaviest multi-day snowstorm on record. Blizzard conditions, heavy snow rates disrupted transportation across the region. In fact, I just recently heard that the Cheyenne Weather Service Forecast Office was considering bringing in airdrops of food. I don't think they had to resort to that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the plans were underway to get helicopters to bring in food to the office staff who were stranded in Cheyenne. So quite a remarkable event. This loop basically shows the evolution of the cyclone from the Intermountain West, wrapping up across the Front Range and then tracking northeastward. And then again, treacherous travel as far west as Arizona. Several crashes, lane closures, icy roads, whiteout conditions, and the snow drifts in Cheyenne about 5 to 10 feet. That'd be something to see. Wind gusts in excess of 50 miles an hour, snow rates 2 to 3 inches an hour. And the Denver airport reported just over 27 inches for the duration of the storm, making it the 4th largest in Denver, dating back to 1881. Farther north, Cheyenne, Wyoming reported 31 inches, about 23 inches of which fell on one day, March 14th, making it the single snowiest day for Cheyenne. And the records go on here. And so I guess my question for Mr. Dr. Henson on this one is, were you here for this and what was it like?
I was, and it was amazing. But to tell you the truth, they kind of blend together over the last year or so. I think they're intermingled with COVID memories, the meteorological memories. I think we were in that range of the mid 20 inches. I have to go look, but yeah, it was impressive as heck. Absolutely, and especially just up to the north. I think Fort Collins did really, really well too, but I'm not 100% sure of that.
Yeah, I'm not. The Windy Peak, which is west, I believe, of Fort Collins, located. Actually, it's up. I think is it in Wyoming? Maybe the Laramie Range, in 52.5 inches from this event. Wow. In Colorado, Buckhorn Mountain had 48.5. So. Quite an event. The one thing though that I've heard, I've seen that maybe when the snow falls around the Boulder area in the Front Range, it never really sticks around for very long because you get the downslope conditions and things will move out pretty quickly. And I guess being in March, I don't imagine the snow was around for very long in the Denver area.
Yeah, that's often the case. Exactly.
Yeah.
And let me say
We'll move on.
from the
Let's go.
warm
Yeah.
sector. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, you're going to go to it next. I'm sorry. I was going to say
There
on
we
March
go.
the 17th, on March the 17th, that started a
go.
wild series of events. Perfect segue. Go.
Yeah, there's our segue for number 3, the tornado outbreaks occurring 8 days apart. 25 distinct tornadoes surveyed after the March 17th outbreak, making it the 6th most prolific in Alabama since 1950. And about a dozen tornadoes hit very close to the same area just a little over a week later. This included 4 EF3 tornadoes. Damage was significant along the paths of the most intense tornadoes. Unfortunately, there were injuries and fatalities. And it is pretty remarkable looking at those 2 surface maps a little over a week apart, but that's what the atmosphere does. It puts together these similar looking patterns that result in similar outcomes and unfortunate events with respect to tornadoes. So this one was sort of a interesting case. 2 moderate risks, another similarity here, showing the 2 SPC, actually day 1 high risks, I'm sorry. And this occurs after no high risk areas were issued for any day in 2020. So the high risk on March 17th was the first since May of 2019. And that's not the longest span between high risks. That occurred between June 2014 and January 2017, for those of you keeping score at home. So, and let's see, so that was number 3, right?
March the 25th is my April 27th because an EF3 hit our house during that event. So it still looks horrible out there. You know, it takes years for the landscape to recover. But
I remember
back.
Yeah, I remember watching you that day, James. I remember streaming you in my home office.
Yeah, that was a rough day. So I can't wait to move to number 4 because I don't like number 3. That's a bad meteorological memory. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to number 4, which is also somewhat bad for an area just to the north. Hopefully this will show up as a loop. We'll run the loop a couple times here, showing this historic flash flood event affecting portions of Middle Tennessee from early March 27th through the 28th. And a warm front moved north into Middle Tennessee on the 27th, stalling near I-40. Between 3 and 4 inches of rain fell with this, but numerous showers and thunderstorms developed along the warm front, and some of it severe. You can see some of the supercells. I'll run the loop again here. And it basically comes in rounds. So another round of severe thunderstorms, including a few supercells, developed in the afternoon and evening near and south of the warm front, and additional heavy rainfall resulted in flash flooding south of Nashville. Flooding only worsened as showers and storms redeveloped over the same area through the evening with numerous flash flood warnings. And after midnight, even more heavy rain along an already waterlogged I-40 corridor prompted a rare flash flood emergency for the southern and eastern sections of the Nashville metro area. Rainfall of 7 to 9 inches caused rapid rises. Many creeks reached their 2nd and 3rd highest water levels ever recorded. The rapid water rises flooded hundreds of homes, and dozens of roadways were flooded and impassable. So this was memory number 4. And for some reason, I'm not sure if I get another slide here or not. Let's see. That always happens with these loops. There we go. Here we go. So you can see the totals in the upper left there reach 5 to 9 inches across Middle Tennessee. And then there's some reports of flash flooding and LSRs. Any comments on this one?
This wouldn't even be the most devastating flood of the year in Tennessee.
No,
it would not. The Waverly event occurred later in the year.
August 21st.
Yeah. So I lost my notes here, but that's probably better because I'll go through it a little bit faster. I know, just sort of ad lib.
Go for it, Greg.
Memory number 5 was the expansion of the drought. Pretty remarkable expansion throughout the year. So showing January, beginning of the year there on the left, and then by August 10th, the widespread drought conditions expand across parts of interior Washington, Oregon, northern Rockies, Montana into North Dakota. Only spotty in the east, although right now in the mid-Atlantic area, some would say we're starting to get into some drought here at the end of the year. But this basically led to some real problems, as we all know. And you see the large area of D4 exceptional drought here in the long-term record back to 2000. So the area covered by exceptional drought is the highest it's been in this record over 20 years, and that that also led to remarkable problems as we went through the summer months with widespread wildfires. And we'll cover those in another memory in just a minute. So that was the drought expands in the West. Any comments on this in terms of the climate connection?
Boy, there's a lot of drought in this 20-year period. There's
Right.
intense debate and discussion about whether this qualifies as a mega drought.
Right.
By some paleoclimatic standards, it does. And of course, paleo droughts and mega droughts can go on for 30 or 40 years. So we may very well have more of this to go. But of course, we're also forcing the climate and warming it up. And so even if precipitation were constant in a warmer climate, you're going to be pulling more of the moisture out of the soil and out of the landscape. So the impacts of any one drought are going to be more intense, even if precipitation doesn't change. And of course, when we have these dry years, it only makes it worse.
Yeah, indeed. And, that's really worrisome, Bob, to hear, that this could go on for quite some time in some areas, because I think this is a record also in terms of the first time that some water rationing has been occurring in interior parts and some of the agricultural areas in California. So water is a rarity in some of those places. And even though we're getting some heavy snow over the next few days, there's a lot of precip and snowfall to make up before things return to any semblance of normal out here. Okay, so number 6, along with the drought, it's probably not too surprising. There was a bit of a tornado watch drought. The third fewest June tornadoes during the year. So only, and what's really interesting here is this trend. You see 2021 coming in tied for third. Last year was number 1, the fewest tornado watches. 6 tornado watches issued in June of 2020, 8 in 2019. So what's happening here? It's normally that's normally the peak of tornado activity and tornado watches across mostly the middle part of the country, Midwest, upper Midwest. I think I had a record here. It ties with 1988 for the third fewest tornado watches, approximately about 25% of the normal number. And even more interesting is it's the third year in a row with low numbers. So what's going on? So this is the norm. Basically, I think this is June 10th. This is according to SPC's daily tornado climatology. June tornadoes are typically found roaming around the high plains, as we all know, with a slight extension east across the Corn Belt and Midwest. And so what I wanted to do was take, a very crude look at reanalysis data here, decided to run a quick calculation on the change in 500 millibar scalar wind speeds across the US. Some theories in terms of a change in climate do suggest that the mid-level westerlies would weaken as the temperature gradient essentially dissolves across the continent, and that temperature gradient driving the thermal wind, and maybe the jet stream would migrate farther north in this time of year and limit shear available for rotating storms. I know it's a reach, but I took some NCEP NCAR reanalysis and took a look at the change. It does seem to appear there's been a small change in the 2 atmospheric proxies for shear and instability here. And again, it's far more complex than that. But the capping in the mid-level warming may be getting a little bit stronger as the shear gets weaker. So, with the lack of disturbances and warmer air aloft, perhaps a little harder to get thunderstorms to develop in the plain states. And then with the lack of stronger flow, due to weaker shear, tornado events are far less likely. So this just compares June 2012 I did June 2012 to 2021 minus the 90s, which were very active. So this is the difference in the shear, weakening flow at 500 millibars here, warming temperatures at mid-levels at 700 millibars here. So there you go. Probably a contributing factor, but I'm sure there's much more than that. And I'd be interested in hearing any thoughts on this very crude analysis.
Gosh, Greg, it's really consistent with the idea of increased drought and heat in the Southwest,
Right. So what is also interesting is that we're driving the elevated mix layer is probably much more pronounced, but boy, getting storms to form where they normally would in the Great Plains is going to be very difficult unless it's very hot at the surface or you've got very strong forcing, which doesn't seem like it would be indicated given that lack of mid-level flow. So there are scenarios in which you can develop these very impressive elevated mix layers that spread well downstream into the Midwest, and with strong enough heating under the dome of the anticyclone across the southern plains, especially in the beginning of summer, when you still have some strong flow across the Great Lakes where you can drive derecho development. So you may see a decrease in tornadoes, but that doesn't necessarily mean a decrease in severe weather. Okay. This one, I think this is right up there at the top if I were to rank events for the year. Also occurring in June, incredibly hot few days at the end of the month over the Pacific Northwest. Just look at the numbers here. We compiled these at WPC. The location shown in Washington and Oregon established new all-time maximum temperature records for any calendar day. Probably should still say preliminary here until NCEI looks at this with respect to the long-term record, but it's quite remarkable for these temperature records to occur in June. If you look back at the records, most of them in this part of the country would occur in July and August. And perhaps even more remarkable, some locations obliterated their previous all-time records by more than 10 degrees. And even incredible that the majority of cases, the prior all-time record maximum temperature had only been set the day before. So a multi-day heat wave of tremendous proportions here across the Pacific Northwest. And I did another kind of interesting data analysis here using the real-time mesoscale analysis. The estimated daily hours above 100 degrees for the 3 days during the peak of the heat wave. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, June 26th through 28th. You get into the gray and the pink, the gray and the magenta, you're talking 10, 12 hours of 100-degree plus temperatures in these areas. So this isn't just, the heating of the day. this is lasting many hours. And a lot of these areas, especially near the coast in the Portland area, Seattle area, are not the infrastructure is not there to support this kind of heat. There's not a lot of air conditioning, I guess, across some of those metropolitan areas. So I found this similar to the Texas analysis in terms of the cold temperatures. I found this analysis to be quite striking with respect to the duration each day of 100+ degree temperatures.
I would just throw in that this almost certainly is going to be the deadliest weather disaster in the history of Washington, maybe Oregon as well. I think in British Columbia, it absolutely is.
Yeah, absolutely. And one area where we kind of see those fatalities occur in some cases many days or weeks after the event. And the cat doesn't like heat either. No, you don't.
No. Cat.
The cat is visiting. Okay, very good. We're going to move on. Let's just see the next one. What's the next one? It's
cats on this show. What's the deal?
Oh, it's interesting. That's Eloise, the cat, and we're going to talk about Claudette and Elsa, the storms. There we go.
She's jealous.
So this is memory number 8. I combined Claudette and Elsa. So Claudette produced gusty winds, flash flooding, tornadoes across much of the southeastern U.S. during the 3rd and 4th weeks of June. Impacts were most severe. Again, Alabama takes another hit, and Mississippi, where heavy rains caused flash flooding. And the map on the left depicts the 4-day rainfall from Claudette, which moved north from the Gulf of Mexico as a potential tropical cyclone and made landfall as a weak tropical storm in Louisiana on the 19th. Extreme southern Mississippi recorded 11 inches of rainfall, and southeastern Louisiana had about 9. And several tornadoes were also spun off of the tropical system and caused severe damage, including a EF2 that damaged a school and destroyed parts of mobile home park in southern Alabama, injuring 20 people. A weakened Claudette continued on an east-northeast track and prompted additional tropical storm watches and warnings from near Cape Fear to the Outer Banks. Little did we know how, what the season was holding at this point, but Claudette regained tropical storm status over northeast North Carolina on the first day of summer before moving over the Western Atlantic and weakening. Let's see here. So there's just a couple of shots of Elsa. So that was memory 8. And we're moving right along now. So I think in the original talk at NWA, I left events number 9 and 10. You know, the talk was in August. There's so much more weather in the year, so I left 9 and 10 open. And then along came Ida, and we can talk about all of the impacts from Ida from the Gulf Coast all the way up through the New York City area. And I've got a little website up there, up here in the corner. Oops, can't go there yet. Hold on. This is, I did over these years of NOAA does some amazing post-storm reconnaissance missions. They get out there almost as soon as the storm clouds have cleared and do low-level flights of the damage. And so I've put together over many years before and after images of these events, just to get some perspective. You know, how much coastline was lost? What does it look like with respect to neighborhoods that are either flooded or washed away? And you know, it's pretty remarkable. Grand Isle was just wrecked by Ida, and watching Ida make landfall, you just get that pit in your stomach that, you know, this is just not going to be good for many people for some time to come. And then interestingly enough, a personal story here. So the day after Ida made landfall, I had to go to Vermont because my younger son was being married, and had rescheduled a couple times. So I've had 2 sons that I've married. I'm done marrying sons, by the way, because it seems like every time there's a wedding of one of my sons, there's a major weather event that I have to be dealing with.
Good to know.
Yeah, good to know. So they're all done, and they're not allowed to marry again. But that picture in the lower left is actually taken in western Vermont, Lake Bomazene, Vermont, on the night that Ida just brought the deluge to New York City. It never rained there, but you go about 20 miles south, they got about an inch of rain, and that's just the moisture streaming north in very dry air mass across western Vermont. And the sunset at the wedding reception that night was just, I've never seen a more stunning sunset. Unfortunately, meanwhile, in New York City, there was just devastation from the extreme rainfall rate that was occurring in that area as a result of the remnants of Ida. WPC was on top of this, a remarkable job. The forecasters and writing our first ever mesoscale precip discussion 3 to 4 hours before the rain in New York City, basically mentioning emergency, flash flood emergency rainfall likely moving into the metropolitan area. So really hard work going on there. I had a really hard night. I mean, I was trying to party at the wedding, but I was also watching the weather. so I didn't sleep at all that night. I was watching what was going on and horror, really, of what was happening in the metropolitan area there. And then we bring up number 10, unfortunately, another nighttime event. Also another son's wedding. I was down in Austin Friday evening, and you know, flew over this area during the day, and realizing that that the area was going to see rapid thunderstorm development later in the day and that evening, and happened to look at my phone and then realize what was going on. And of course, wake up Saturday morning and hear the stories from especially from Kentucky and Illinois. And this is just one of those, just, you know, we pour over what happened, how it happened, how the messaging was. I mean, all of that is still very fresh and still going on. I was proud last night to work for the National Weather Service when I saw folks like, you know, Pat Spoden on there talking about the nerves, you know, that night watching that storm, lofting debris to 30,000 feet and having to type out the emergency, the tornado emergency for Mayfield. That's what we do to try to save lives and property. And I think it's also important to look back and to maintain a record of this, so we can certainly learn from that. So that is the year in review. I think I don't have the title slide. I gave the title slide for you guys to tweet out earlier, but these are all the NWA meetings that we've done the year in review at. I don't know where are we going in 2022. Anybody know? Somebody's got to know where we're going. Or is it all virtual?
Maybe right here on Zoom. I don't know.
Yeah.
So there you have it, the 10 meteorological memories of 2021. And again, always a pleasure to make an appearance on the show and talk about these events and what we learned from them. And I'm honored to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg. Did you say your cat's name is Eloise?
Yeah, the cat we call her Wheeze. You could hear her wheezing.
Eloise was my first hurricane in 1975.
There you go.
Before you guys were born.
She's about that old. That cat's like not quite that old, but she's 17.
Yeah.
It's an old cat.
Wow. And we had one other very violent tornado in Alabama, north of Birmingham, Fultondale, on my birthday, January 25th, which was quite destructive. Right after this show finished.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Greg, thank you so much.
Lots of other events. But thanks, Greg.
Thanks,
Hey,
Greg.
I have a follow-up. Just wondering, Greg, where would you put the cyclone of last Wednesday? Would that be an honorable mention?
That you're stealing my thunder there, Bob.
Yeah. So I was enthralled by that, and it could easily be 11, no doubt. And I did a whole bunch of analysis on that as well. I did I used the real-time analysis to do peak wind gust across the plains, and it was really just amazing to watch that unfold. A very well forecast event. That the models indicating a edge of the distribution type event with respect to wind. That was a windbag, and so yeah, absolutely a memorable one, no question about it. And there's always more, right?
It never ends. All right. Yeah. Well. So we've got a lot more to talk about. Hopefully, Greg, you can stay with us for just a little bit here.
Sure.
I guess at this point, Kim, maybe you'll kind of open up a discussion here with Bob, and Jen, you've got to open up a discussion with Shane here. There's just a lot to talk about.
Shane, what's your time look like, Shane? You need to go. I know you're extremely busy right now, and you're awful generous with your time. Do you need to go ahead and leave or anything like that?
No, I can hang out here. I'm good.
Okay, good. Well, then that's a great way to go then, Kim, because Bob Henson, that great article you wrote in the on one of the online publications this last week was fabulous. Take it away, Kim.
Absolutely. And Bob, thank you so much for all the great insights you brought in. Greg, as you were talking, thank you for bringing in Bob's perspective. I think that was a wonderful conversation about the big events of the year. And Bob, for those who aren't familiar, is an amazing science journalist, and now he's working for Yale Climate Connections. He's worked for a number of different outfits over the years. And if you need someone who will balance, the weather event and properly contextualize it with what's known about climate change, it's really threading a needle. And that's something that many of us don't trust to anyone quite the way that we trust it to Bob. And I want to turn to you, Bob, as he's blushing. I want to turn to you now, Bob, and ask you about some of the events that have happened recently. So you wrote these remarkable pieces summarizing just how extreme the December tornado and severe weather events were. And I was wondering if you'd like to share a little bit about that. And in particular, one of the things that has been mentioned is this climate change? A lot of people are offhandedly saying, well, this is our new normal. This is what this looks like. But something you discussed is that might not be quite so simple to say. And I thought that you gave the science its full due in a way that few did. So please take it away with anything you want to highlight from those events, and especially, what is the climate connection?
Well, thank you, Kim. And I have to thank Kim in particular because the piece that I wrote for Washington Post Capitol Weather Gang, I had an assignment basically to write it last Sunday night, a week ago. And I reached out rather frantically, and Kim was just right there with her thoughts and perspective. And I didn't have to wait hours and hours, and that made such a difference.
I was at a wedding.
It's the chair, Bob. It's the chair that's gets your attention.
And likewise, Steve Strader at Villanova was just Johnny on the spot with near instant input. Thank you both, and thanks for having me on here. It's really nice to be on the show. There's so many things that come to mind when I think about the connections between extreme weather and climate change, and so often, and I think increasingly, it's easy to just look at an event and say rhetorically, well, yeah, there you go. That's climate change. And in a subjective sense, that may feel right. But I think it's also important to bring in whatever science we have and try to delineate and put things in context. And clearly everything that goes on now is happening in an atmosphere that is different chemically than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. But that's not going to affect every kind of event the same way, right? Heat waves and extreme rains, those are really clearly established to be changing with a warming climate. And in part, that's because those happen so many times. You have many locations where you can measure precipitation and temperature. So you can really build up a solid statistical database and make solid conclusions. When you start drilling down to things like severe weather and especially tornadoes, the database just isn't the same kind of database, the same quality. It's affected by how observations have changed. For example, with tornadoes, before storm chasing really took off in the 80s and 90s, we just didn't have the same quality of data. And so you have to account for things like that. So it's more challenging with tornadoes, and especially because a lot of people would say in recent days, well, of course, climate change is boosting tornado activity because you're putting more heat in the system, right? And you've got more heat energy, and therefore you get more extremes of storms. And while on some levels there's truth to that, as you all know, with tornadoes, it's a delicate balance. You don't just want endless amounts of instability, or you just get a bunch of thunderstorms that dump rain and compete with each other. You've got to have, in most cases, enough of a cap to keep thunderstorms from going nuts, but not so strong a cap that it just prevents everything from forming. So there's a kind of narrow range to get the optimal situation. And for all those reasons, it's a lot more difficult to make attributions about past tornado events and climate change, and also more difficult to look forward and say, well, how are tornadoes going to change? There has been interesting work in the last few years. I think one real landmark is the paper by Victor Gensini and Harold Brooks in 2018, showing the shift in tornado alley toward the Mid-South and away from the Southern Plains. The idea is not that the Mid-South is getting more tornadoes now than the Southern Plains, but that they're getting more than they used to, and the Southern Plains are getting less than they used to. And I think what Greg was just showing, June getting really quiet in the last several years in the Southern Plains for tornadoes, that's a classic manifestation of what Victor and Harold were finding in their paper. There's also been work this year looking at tornado environments and finding kind of similar results. An increase in tornadic environments in the Mid-South during wintertime. And boy, that jives really well with what we just saw, in the outbreak on Friday in Kentucky and thereabouts. That's very consistent with that finding. Now, we're not going to get an EF4 tornado running for upwards of 150 miles, every December, right? That's another challenge with attribution of climate change. You just don't have that many events. So it's not like we're seeing a trend and we're seeing more outbreaks of the scale of what we saw a few days ago. These were kind of one-off events. But there is going to be the potential when we get record warm, record moist air masses in December, January, February, those clearly are going to happen more and, are happening more. And when they hit the levels that we've seen this month, we're smashing record highs all over a large part of the country this month. I think last I looked, we were up to 3,500 record highs, individual daily record highs. I won't be shocked at all if this is the warmest December in contiguous U.S. history. So that's a necessary ingredient, but not sufficient, right? You can get a record warm, moist air mass, but you've also got to have the jet stream and the shear and all that. So that's where I would love to see a formal attribution study. And these are being done. There's been way over 100 studies now for the BAMS series called Explaining Extreme Weather Events. And there's also been about 40 or so done for a program called the World Weather Attribution Program. And in a nutshell, these studies use computer models to replicate a certain kind of weather scenario with and without greenhouse gases and compare the two and see, well, are we seeing more of that kind of weather event with greenhouse gases? And in a lot of cases, it shows there is a connection. Occasionally, it shows there's not really a connection. A good example of that was a study done recently for a couple of years of intense drought in Madagascar, which has been really disastrous. And there have been some kind of loose attribution to climate change, but the study found that it really probably is not climate change what's going on now there. It doesn't seem to be being forced right now by climate change. So these studies don't always find a connection, but usually they tend to. So I would love to see such a study for the Mayfield day, the tornado day, but even more for the windbag storm that we saw on Wednesday. I think that one would probably pop even more in terms of being so outrageous for the latitude, the distribution of, I think, over 60 tornadoes now, which blows my mind. The number of heat records set for December, I think all those things would make it a strong candidate for such an attribution study. So we'll see what happens with that.
I've got some of the graphics when you need them for that one. The one thing that struck me on the December 10th event is the nature of steady state tornadic supercell. So how unusual to see a supercell on the ground with a violent tornado for such a long track. And again, we know that with respect to historic events, those are the events that are going to be in the record books, right? Because they're going to cover enough territory that there'll be a survey like 1925, the tri-state tornado in March of 1925. Another aspect of the event, comparing it to 1925, is the topography. It happened in a very similar part of the country, right? That the confluence of the Mississippi Ohio Valley. Is there something about the topography there that allows supercells to persist for some period of time and produce tornadoes of this track magnitude? And again, this goes back somewhat to Troy's comment about return interval. What truly would be the return interval on a 200-mile track violent tornado? Right now, there's not many samples in the database to go with.
That's a great question, Greg, about the tri-state tornado having been in the same general area, just maybe, I think it was like 75 miles north, almost exactly the same vector. I mean, I think they were both
not necessarily the season, right? Because it happened in mid-March, right? So not quite not in the May period we'd normally think of as peak tornado, May and June.
There was a fantastic Twitter thread by someone at SPC, and maybe one of you all will know his name, but
Evan Bentley. I just put it into chat. Yes.
Thank you. Yes. Fantastic. Evan Bentley laid out about 10 tweets looking at specific reasons why the Mississippi Valley would be prone to such events. And in a nutshell, I think one of the points was that large-scale cyclones, the low-pressure centers, are typically intensifying in the plains, but not really lifting out right away. And correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, but then when they get into the eastern US, they're often propagating, but not intensifying. And so there may be kind of a sweet spot in between. And there were 3 or 4 other things, but they all just made sense. My brain, I was putting little check marks by each one. So that's a really brilliant take I thought he had.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And it had to have been so interesting for both of you to watch all of these events unfold as you did, and to be trying to think about this climatological context. I'm interested, Greg, you've been at WPC for 5 years. When these severe events happen, there's some crossover in what you're interested in at WPC and SPC, but is it kind of hard to not be at SPC doing the kinds of work that you were doing when you were enmeshed in all of the details of the reports, and even trying to understand things like the fatalities of big events? It feels like you can do something. I imagine that it just feels different in your new role. Do you have any comment to make on that?
That it's a hard job. Let me tell you, experience with the 2011 outbreak and basically cataloging the events and trying to get the numbers right, with the media pounding at the door saying, well, you said yesterday it was, X number, and today it's this number. And we see in the preliminary reports, there's, 400 tornadoes. And then, we know they're individual LSRs. It is tough. And so To be quite honest, I look back fondly at those years, but I don't want to be in that hot seat. it was a lot of work for the years that I did it, and you kind of run on adrenaline. And I'm sure Matt Elliott, Bill Bunting, and Pat Marsh, and the others back there. Nobody wants to have to experience the amount of attention that comes to bear after a devastating event like this. And we had our fair share with Ida. A lot of questions about, in the wake of Ida's rainfall. So the stress is still there. It's just changed from EF scale to flooding, right? So yeah, I look back fondly on those years, but I don't necessarily miss them when events like this come along. And I don't wish for these events to come along. I'd be much happier if we didn't have to deal with that that often. So yeah, when I heard the story breaking that on that Saturday morning, it brought back a lot of stressful memories about dealing with the events of 2011. And that was a remarkable time, just in terms of the working relationship with people like Harold Brooks. Harold and I spent days through the weekend tallying, by county, what kind of losses we were having, so that we could speak to the event with respect to its impacts. And we all know that immediately following these events, it's not clear at all. You hear a lot of rumors, and you have to sort of sort that out. And and Rick knows too, that keeps you up at night.
Yeah, Greg, as Kim was asking that question, I was answering it for you in my head, because I've been there with you and seen what goes on there. And it's, the media interviews and the scrutiny and the attention. And I mean, what a cool place to work. But you were working your rear end off after an event like that at SPC. So my answer to the question she was asking was like, you probably, I don't want to say enjoy is not the right word, but you get to look at the event from a different perspective without all the pressure. You're not having to go into the office at 3 a.m. or spend the weekend. We love Harold Brooks, but spending the weekend with Harold Brooks, how many times can you do that? So, so that was
tell him you said that, Rick.
Show title.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think you answered the question. Yeah, it's just like there's a lot of pressure that goes on there, even at a national center, and people focus so much on the WFOs and the stress of warnings and things like that, but national centers are right there in the thick of it too, as far from a different level and a different perspective. That's for sure.
Very much so. With that, I think we need to transition to Jen. And Shane, you've been so patient to wait. I know we have a lot more to cover here. So Jen, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, I want to read in part the email that came in from Sean Hammond and why we have Shane on tonight. He said, there's a television station in Bowling Green called WBKO where Shane Hollanday is a current chief meteorologist. Shane has been with BKO for a number of years and has always done outstanding work. He was joined by another meteorologist, Ethan Emery, who was running radar and keeping a close watch on National Weather Service chat. There was a point in their coverage when the tornado came really close to the TV station and knocked out power and crippled their radar capabilities. Want to know what they did? They resorted to literally drawing out the polygons for the television viewers and drawing, to the best of their ability, the thunderstorms and where they were located. I think it would be very interesting to see if one or both of them would be willing to join the show someday. And we totally agreed. And so we asked both to be on. I have a feeling that Ethan probably turns into a pumpkin early because he does the morning and midday. But Shane, thank you so much for joining us. And I was looking at the surveys for the National Weather Service in Louisville. Bowling Green is in Warren County, Kentucky. There was an EF3 that started in Logan and ended in Warren. And then there was the EF3 that went right through Bowling Green. And tragically, 16 were killed by the tornado. And then there was a man who died of a heart attack during cleanup. And then there was another Bowling Green tornado rated EF2. So I just wanted to give that little recap, but I want you to take us through your night and how this close call led you to pretty much go old school and be highly innovative to get information to the public.
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, Jen, and thank you, James Spann, for allowing me to be on the program tonight. What an honor and privilege it is to be a part of this. I'll take you back almost 3 weeks now. I'll take you back to the weekend prior to this December 10th, December 11th event, where we did have a minor severe weather episode. This was on a late Sunday night into an early Monday morning. This was a level 1, level 2. So we're talking marginal to slight risk kind of event. And it had been a while since we had had even a slight risk up for any part of our coverage area here in Southern Kentucky. You go back several months. In fact, fall was pretty quiet for us. And really much of spring was relatively quiet for us too. I know in the March event that was talked about earlier where Alabama was struck so hard, we had a couple of minor or weak tornadoes in the middle of that one in March, but nothing too strong. We also missed out on the flash flooding that affected Tennessee during the month of March. That stayed just to our south. So I have to wonder if complacency had set in for a lot of folks here in Southern Kentucky, but at any rate, I think Mother Nature fired a warning shot the weekend before this event, as we did have one EF1 touchdown in one of our westernmost counties. This was Todd County on the Monday morning prior to this massive severe weather outbreak. With that one, the damage was very minor. There were no injuries, but we did have, for the first time in several months, tornado warnings issued here within Southern Kentucky and also right across the line in northern middle Tennessee. So I think that served as something of a wake-up call prior to this event. Fast forward through the week, by Monday and Tuesday, we started looking at model data with the GFS and then eventually the NAM picking up on potential for a more significant severe episode in this area. We were looking at low-level wind fields, 5,000 feet off the ground at about 75 knots, pretty consistently with each model run that came in early that week. So my morning meteorologist, Ethan, and I started to get a little bit louder with our message early that week saying, hey, we could be dealing with another round of severe weather come late Friday night into Saturday morning. And the time frame amongst the models was starting to come more into view by that point. So we knew at least that much. And by Tuesday night, as 0Z runs started to trickle in, it was looking more likely that we were going to have to contend with at least some severe weather. Now, did we think that it would be the long EF3, EF4 tracks that ultimately we would see? No, we certainly weren't thinking anything of that magnitude at that moment, but it was enough for us to declare Friday and Saturday first alert weather days, which we normally do here at WBKO whenever we get within 48 hours of what we feel will be a significant or impactful weather event, or if high confidence exists amongst the team here to do that. So we pulled that trigger on Wednesday. And of course, as more model runs and data came in to us, it became increasingly clear that we were going to be dealing with, at the very least, a damaging wind threat and an isolated tornado threat. Keep in mind that here in South Central Kentucky, normally we see tornadoes, I'd say 8 to 8.5 times out of 10. They're going to be the quick spin up variety like we had in Todd County the weekend prior to this event. They're usually EF0s, EF1s. I thought we'd probably get that out of this event, maybe a strong tornado or two, especially west of Bowling Green. At least that was our thinking at this point. I remember on the day 3 outlook, we were placed in a slight risk for severe leading up to this event. And then that was elevated to a level 3 enhanced risk on Thursday, the day prior to this event. And then, of course, on the day of this event, we saw a moderate risk come out for the mid-Mississippi Valley, talking West Tennessee, far West Kentucky, did not include any of our area. So my thinking stayed the same in that we would probably have 2 distinct rounds of thunderstorm activity, one being discrete cells out ahead of a mainline or QLCS that would likely come charging through the area during the wee hours of Saturday morning, and possibly some embedded supercells within that line. That was our thinking. Of course, we got into the event. First tornado warning comes down just after 7 o'clock on Friday night. It was the first of many. And we had one supercell after another track through our northwestern counties. And that would be Hopkins, as well as Muhlenberg, Christian, McLean, and then eventually into Ohio counties. By 9:30 to 10 o'clock in that time frame, before I went on the air for our 10 o'clock newscast that night, started to get word of a possible tornado touchdown in Muhlenberg County. and we saw damage to a department store there. That was the only report of damage we had leading up to our 10 o'clock newscast that night. Now, I do remember right at 10 o'clock, we had one tornado warning come off the table for northern Ohio County, which is in the northern part of our DMA here, designated market area that we cover in South Central Kentucky. When that tornado warning was expired, we did not have any warnings active at that moment. So we went to our newscast at 10 with the caveat that we would likely have more tornado warnings. And at this point, we had already had the tornado touchdown over in Mayfield, Kentucky. And we were starting to get word of significant damage there. The cluster of supercells that was affecting that area was racing to the northeast at 50 to 60 miles an hour into our westernmost counties, and was moving so fast that by 10:15, when I was just about to go on for our main weather segment at 10, a new tornado warning had been issued in advance of that supercell that produced the tornado in Mayfield. That included Dawson Springs, included Earlington in Hopkins County, which for us is fringe, but I knew that it would be into our DMA very soon. So I went on with the weathercast, heavily emphasizing that this was something to watch, because not only did we see the very pronounced hook echo on radar, we were starting to see debris balls, which we rarely see on radar here in Southern Kentucky. So that was more disconcerting to me. What was even more disconcerting were the tags that were coming with those National Weather Service bulletins out of Paducah. Pat Spone and his gang that we mentioned earlier. Large, destructive, dangerous, and catastrophic. It is highly unusual for us to see those tornado warning tags here in Southern Kentucky, but that's what we were starting to get from our westernmost sections between 10 and 10:30 that night. So I started to kind of elevate my voice, get a little bit louder with a message saying, hey, you need to take these warnings very seriously. And as soon as we were done with the 10 o'clock newscast, we kicked it back to wall-to-wall coverage, and Ethan and I stayed wall-to-wall for the remainder of the night into the wee hours of Saturday morning for 10 plus hours total. Minus the time that we were on for the 10 o'clock newscast, we were on consecutively from roughly 7:15 that Friday night until 5:30 Saturday morning. And then, of course, in the midst of that came the tornado warning that emerged from out of Tennessee. We saw a very strong couplet first near Dover, Tennessee, which is in Stewart County in the Kentucky Lake area. That crossed over the Kentucky line into Christian County first, then into Todd County, then into Logan County, moving along east-northeast about 60 miles an hour, continuing to show strong rotation, very pronounced couplet, all the way into Warren County. This was shortly after 1 o'clock. We had a tornado warning issued well in advance for Warren County, I might add. Not too long after 12:30 that morning, that extended into the 1 o'clock hour. And let me say, first off, most of our DMA is warned by the Weather Service office out of Louisville. Only our western 5 counties are covered by Paducah's WFO. And John Gordon, the MIC at Louisville, on top of his game with every single warning that came out that night. Lead times were tremendous, and I want to commend them for that. Back to the Bowling Green tornado. Shortly after 1 o'clock, started to see lightning. It was becoming more vivid in the sky west of Bowling Green. Then fast forward to about 1:14 to 1:15, and that was the moment that I will never forget. And I was on the chroma key tracking with velocity on our radar that area of rotation getting closer and closer to Bowling Green. And I say that area, there are actually 2 areas of rotation that were very discernible on velocity mode at that moment. One going toward Bowling Green Metro, another coming out of next door neighbor Logan County into northwestern Warren County that was eventually declared an EF3 by the Weather Service survey. That moved into our northwestern sections of Warren County around the Hadley community. Right at 1:15, I remember things getting noisier in the studio. And I said, it is getting very noisy in here. I wasn't sure if folks at home could hear that very well, but there's a garage door in back of our studio that was banging like I'd never heard it before. And the building started to shake, tremble just a little bit. I did that once. The trembling stopped for, I'd say, about 15 or 20 seconds. As that stopped, we cut the camera off of me and off the chroma key and onto our live weather cam view as we were facing west down Russellville Road to see if we could find anything, whether there was a funnel or not. Ethan was panning the camera about as far to the northwest as he could go before you run into our tower. As it turns out, that massive funnel was just northwest of our station by only a few hundred miles at that moment. And it was there, and then that the building started to shake a second time. It shook more violently. This right at 1:15 that morning. And just beyond that moment, the power went out. And there was about 10 seconds lag there between the time the lights went out and our backup generator came on. Once backup generator came on, you could hear our voices, although you couldn't see anything. We were still in black on camera at that moment. We were off air on cable. We were off air on dish. And we had absolutely no radar data to go by whatsoever, at least not at that moment. It took a little while before I was able to retrieve radar off of my phone through the WBKO weather app. So at least we had that much to go on. And then eventually our news director brought us an iPad, sent it into the studio, and we had tornado warning polygons that we were able to draw. It was like 1970s weather, drawing in those warning polygons for areas east of Bowling Green that were being impacted at that moment. So it took a while for us to not only get back on the air, at least in some way, shape, or fashion, but also streaming. It knocked our streaming offline as well. So we were doing Facebook Live off of my phone and drawing tornado and severe thunderstorm warning polygons for the eastern part of our DMA, all the way up until the time that we were off air, which was at 5:30. I'll never forget, too, that moment after we signed off the air. Myself, Ethan, and a lot of folks from our newsroom kind of gathered around. News director talked to us, and we started getting word of significant damage in and around the city, particularly through Russellville Road down the stretch, and also the 31W bypass, which at one time was the main drag here in Bowling Green. Now it's Scottsville Road, but there are still many businesses, many restaurants there that we knew were heavily damaged. And that's when we started to wrap our head around the seriousness of this situation. This was no little spin up. This was a strong, if not violent, tornado. Now, I remember our news director saying, catch your breath, give yourself a moment, and then we'll need to get back to it. And roughly an hour later, of course, daylight came, and then we were able to see the breadth and scope of what had occurred here in Bowling Green. And it was absolutely jaw-dropping. I'll never forget that moment of silence right after we went off the air. And I'll never forget that moment of how loud it got here at the station and at the studio at 1:15 when that EF3, almost EF4 tornado was just a few hundred yards to our north.
Wow, Shane, that is just unbelievable. And both of you, I mean, to do that amount of coverage for that long, both of you are just to be commended, and for keeping your calm and taking folks through and being so innovative to try to get the coverage back going again. I've read just a few stories of some of the tragedy there, and sadly, there have been several members of one family who have passed away. Do you know much about the fatalities there?
Well, I do know that 17 people have died here in Bowling Green, and out of that 17, 7 were from one family. That family was not too far away from the station, maybe no more than a half mile, 3/4 of a mile from here, in one of the subdivisions on the west side of Bowling Green that were hit very heavily as that tornado ripped a path from west to east right across town. And I say that tornado, that was the strongest one of the bunch. The one that I had a chance to survey with John Gordon was an EF2 that was on the east side of Bowling Green, struck just across from the iconic Corvette Museum here, hit the Corvette Motorsports Park, did a lot of significant damage there. And then, of course, we had the one that tracked out of Logan County into the northwestern part of Warren County. That, too, was a killer tornado. There was one killed there in Logan County. So I know it's easy for folks to get caught up in the EF ratings. Was it a 3? Was it a 4? For me, the numbers that mattered here most, unfortunately, were the fact that we lost 17 lives in Bowling Green. We lost 1 in Logan County. We lost 11 in Muhlenberg County. We lost 12 in Hopkins County. And we lost 76 people total here in Kentucky out of that outbreak. It was the deadliest outbreak here since the super outbreak of April 1974.
Shane, thank you so much for this. This is just incredibly moving and powerful. And my hat goes out to you and your colleague for being on the air all night long. I was wondering, it seems often in this late spring and summer, you see these, intense debris balls, debris signatures, and you think, well, a lot of that is probably leaves being tossed up or from trees, right? But I imagine you were thinking, well, it couldn't have been that in December, right?
Right. I mean, this is a rarity, of course, for any time of the year for us, but especially here in the middle of December and middle of the night, which unfortunately was worst case scenario. I harken back to the Super Tuesday outbreak of February 2008 myself. That's another event that I covered here at WBKO. We had 7 fatalities. We had 3 in Muhlenberg County. We also had 4 that night in Allen County from an EF3 tornado that tracked northeast out of Macon County, Tennessee. That was a middle of the night outbreak where you had very high shear, very low instability, but very strong jet stream dynamics. So this one reminded me a lot of that, but unfortunately was on a higher scale and higher magnitude with a higher death toll.
On that last point, I think this is a great moment to transition to Rick, because Rick has been working to help us understand what is known about the fatalities from this event and doing a lot of tabulation for the Weather Service, and talk about a heartrending task to perform, but it's helpful, Rick, being outside the immediate damage area, that you're able to take some of this load off of those local forecasters. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been finding? I know the stories of these couple families in Bowling Green are especially heartbreaking.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm gonna be sharing this data obviously with anybody who needs it. This is more of really a personal thing for me, just to kind of understand, as a meteorologist and someone that educates people about weather and safety. I think it's always important to go back and look at these events. It's not fun to do, but I've been looking at it a lot, and what Shane was talking about, that was some of the most shocking stories I heard were there in Bowling Green and Warren County, with the family of 7 people, the grandmother and the mom and dad and all the children. And then there was a separate instance in Bowling Green where 5 people, almost an entire family or parts of 2 families, died. And I guess that part of Bowling Green was a place where lots of refugees came. So one of the families were Bosnian immigrants who had not been there that long, and there was another person in that general area that was a refugee from Burma. So you don't know what role language played in any of that, but it's really it's just fascinating to look at this and just trying to piece together what happened and where people were when the fatalities happened. And we've all heard the stories about the Amazon warehouse, and certainly that's a whole episode probably by itself. The candle factory, the tragedies there with people who were, as Kim talks about, you're situationally vulnerable. Some of those people seemingly didn't have much of a choice on being in a safer place than they were at that time. So lots of things to look at, and I wasn't able to be on the show last week, so I appreciate getting to talk about it a little bit. There was another very, very sad story in Graves County around Mayfield of an Amish family of 7 people. The mom, the dad, and 2 of the children died in the tornado. I'm assuming they had no clue what was going on, because they didn't have electricity, they didn't have indoor plumbing, they lived in a double wide mobile home that was basically just bare bones. And so you just have to wonder. We talk so much about vulnerability and getting the warnings and why don't people do this and that. There's so many stories that could unfold out of here, and I'm only going through what is available out in the media. There's some in here I still don't have a clue what happened to them, but it's very, very interesting. And there's some common threads that you kind of see going through this. The the majority of the deaths happened in a home at that time of night. That kind of makes sense. About 22% of the fatalities were in businesses. That's mainly the Amazon distribution facility, the candle factory there in Mayfield, and then also there were I didn't know where to classify them, but they were in a resort in Northwest Tennessee, actually on a duck hunting trip. A bunch of people there, and 3 people died at that location. And there were quite a few mobile home deaths. I haven't been able to break down home versus mobile home. Some of the reports coming out of the counties are very sketchy as far as details on all that. So a wide range of age distribution, all the way from 2 months to 98 years old, and everywhere in between. Fairly even breakdown between males and females as far as that goes. But just some heartbreaking stories of people seemingly trying to do the right thing. Some people just didn't seem to understand the severity of the situation and just went to sleep, went to bed, and were not really seemingly not really in tune with everything that was going on. There was a tragic family in a tragic story of a family in southeast Missouri. These people had moved into a new house a week ago near Hayti, Missouri. They had been affected by a tornado in 2006, so they had a safety plan. They had a mom and dad and three little kids. So they had a plan. They reviewed it. They knew exactly where they were going to go. They went to an interior bathroom. They even texted a picture to their family members about 15 minutes before the tornado hit to prove, hey, look, we're taking this seriously. And unfortunately, one of the daughters was one of the fatalities, a 9-year-old there. So, you can go through this and read the stories. Then I think it's beneficial to kind of understand a little bit more about why people are doing what they're doing or what kind of information they may have been getting. There's some, I don't want to ramble on too long here, but there was a story about, there's a guy in Mayfield, Kentucky. His daughter was calling him through the day and urging him to leave, come to my house and take shelter. She said he was usually super cautious about storms. He paid attention to them, but this time for some reason he was being stubborn and decided he was just going to wait it out and see how bad it would get. And he unfortunately did not make it. Lots and lots of people, whether they're associated with fatalities or just in general, and this is common in every event I've been a part of or observed, people just wait too long to go to shelter. People, even in their homes, they just, I don't know what it is. And they may have a basement that they can get to. It's just walking a few steps, going down the stairs to the basement, but they wait too long. And there's several stories that I found of people that knew their shelter was in the basement, but they waited so long until debris was hitting the house or they heard the tornado to make a move, and then they couldn't get there. They had to just huddle in a hallway or just, wherever they could get in the time that they had. So that's kind of a social type of thing. So anyway, that's kind of just a breakdown of some of that. I didn't have any direct involvement of the event. My most direct involvement was I was kind of nowcasting. I've got family. I've got a brother-in-law and a bunch of nieces and nephews in Jonesboro, Arkansas, which was hit back in March of 2020. And of course, they're kind of on edge with storms there. So the big storm started there just southwest of Jonesboro, and I was giving them scan by scan updates on that and saying, no, you're safe. It's going to go south of you. And I had no idea at that time that, what it was going to turn into. I don't think any of us did. But soon after it got past Jonesboro is when the first fatalities happened. And then, the rest is history from that. So let's see. Let me just think if there's any other notes I had. I don't have anything else, but if anybody has any questions, I've shared a lot of the kind of the analysis and stuff about the fatalities. But so yeah, if anybody has any questions, let's go ahead.
Hey, Rick, thank you for this. I was curious just now, it came to mind, were there tornado fatalities in all 4 of the states that were associated with the quad state supercell, even if we don't know yet if that was one tornado or several? And if so, is this the first time that even a single storm has produced fatalities in 4 states, much less a single tornado?
That's a great question. And that's one thing I haven't done yet, is to go in and kind of look at And I don't know off the top of my head, there were definitely fatalities in 4 states: Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Illinois, well, actually in 5 states, Tennessee. But as far as the Illinois fatalities were not associated with the big, the quad state, or I guess it was the tri-state tornado. I don't think there was a tornado that was I don't think we had a quad state tornado that came out of that, because there was a gap. But
It was a gap.
anyway.
Okay, we know that.
Yeah, I would say that that's got to be pretty rare. I mean,
Yeah.
and again, the only events that might be able to compete would be, April 2011, and perhaps somewhere in 74, where you had maybe broken long track, but the same parent supercell, with fatalities across 4 states. It's possible, but yeah, those would be the only other outbreaks I would consider being competitive with that. I know there was one long track supercell in the 2011 April 27 event, I think tracked across from northeast Alabama through Tennessee into southwest Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a tri-state, and I think it may have had fatalities in all 3 states. But again, it's just very it's really humbling to see when the atmosphere does something like that. And the account from Shane there reminded me, Shane, a little bit of the broadcast meteorologists out of Joplin during the Joplin tornado. Some of the coverage there was, right there. They saw it on the tower cam, and they had impacts in the studio, and they kept going. So thanks for that account, and thanks for what you do. And Rick, thanks for that summary too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Again, we were just very, very fortunate that tornado missed us here at the station. Others, of course, were not nearly as lucky.
Yeah. Yep, Shane, that was an incredible story, and thanks for sharing that with us. And one other thing, I mean, the ratings got so much attention, just an inordinate amount of attention from people on social media and instant experts on, well, you can't tell me that's not an EF5 and all that stuff. And that could be a whole series of episodes right there. But I think we've all endured enough of that for the week. But part of that is, it's interesting to look at the fatalities. I think most of these fatalities happened along the track of one of the EF4 tornadoes, but almost certainly not all these fatalities did not happen in EF4 level damage. Many of these fatalities happen in EF2 or EF3 level damage, because even in these huge historic tornadoes, only a very small number of points along the tornado track were rated EF4. So not every one of these fatalities was in the EF4 structure, a structure that got an EF4 rating. But it's interesting to note, depending on the quality of the construction, the circumstances, all kinds of things, some that we can predict and kind of control, most of them that we can't. You can get bad things to happen in even some of the weaker variety of tornadoes if the circumstances are just not right. So anyway, okay.
I do want to know why there was so much hate and anger and rage over these storm surveys. And I've been doing this a long time. It was nasty. And Kim, you're a social scientist. What's the deal here? I mean, is it just the fact that the nation's in an angry mood? They want to fight the political polarization? Why did it generate such a high amount of hate?
I love how anytime people do something crazy, you're like, Kim, can you explain this for us? And
that's why you're here.
Let's go to Kim.
That's why you're here.
I don't know if you know this, my PhD is actually in abnormal psychology.
Yes.
There was commentary. This wasn't me. I'm trying to remember who this was. Someone talked about the EF scale to other people that aren't just us. We're interested in this as a damage indicator exercise, but to other people, it's a validation of their feelings. So they look at that and they see, this is what the impact was to me. And I'd never really seen it quite that way, but that was a really profound way for me to think about it. I think what people were looking to the Weather Service to do was validate their feelings that this was a generational awful event. And what an interesting thing for them to be looking for us to do, but I suspect that that's part of it. And it's such an interesting, I know, Rick, you've talked about putting forward messages about how these ratings are done and walking this very fine line. You don't want to tell people, well, the things that were hit weren't something we could get a damage indicator off of to get you to a 5, but that was the reality of it. And saying that in a way that doesn't devalue someone's life and livelihood, it's a tough road.
Yeah, and that was actually some of the internal discussion I think going on, is like, how do you tell someone that your house wasn't strong enough to be even rated an EF5, or your house was not well constructed? Nobody wants to hear that, especially in a traumatic situation like this. But I had not heard that explanation either, Kim, but that's really interesting. I know you run into people. There was two kinds of people, it seemed like, in this ratings debate. There were people maybe somehow associated either directly or on the edges of this event that had some stake in it, that maybe we're looking for something like that. I've just been through the worst experience of my life, all the damage, destruction, deaths, injuries, and you're telling me this wasn't worthy of the worst rating that you can give it. How much worse can it get? I can see people thinking that. But then there's the whole, whether Twitter or whatever, there's a whole group of people out there that have no business even, I don't even know why they care about it. I only interacted with one or two people on Twitter. I interacted and then erased everything with about 100 people through the week, because I decided it's not worth it. I mean, I was texting people just to vent, but anyway, I think a lot of people I don't know what it is. I don't know why they care, and why they find it. People were looking at radar data and looking at radar signatures and getting the winds there and saying that was the wind speed. And Bob mentioned in the chat about they kept showing these images of foundations, home foundations swept clean, and a lot of people, that's what if you read the EF scale descriptions, if a home is completely destroyed and the foundation is swept clean, that's an EF5. Well, it kind of depends on a lot of other factors. That's not enough to call it an EF5. I mean, I've seen EF2 damage, EF2 level tornadoes that produce that level of damage. If the house is not connected to the foundation, it doesn't take much. So it's so much more complicated. I don't think people appreciate it, or the people that are really just coming after the meteorologists and saying, you can't tell me it's not a 5. I don't think they care, or they're going to listen. But I started off early on Twitter. That was really one of my only contributions, just start to explain to people, look, you're not going to get a rating tonight. You're not going to get it tomorrow morning. It's going to take a long time. And you have to, in this event, even in Norman, I mean, sometimes we bring in experts. We call Tim Marshall. I don't know how many times I've interacted with Tim just getting advice on a rating. And I don't care how active your office is, you just don't encounter damage like this enough to be an expert on it. So that went on a lot. The quick response team is part of the weather. That's a group of meteorologists who have a lot of experience doing surveys. So they were called in to help Paducah and Louisville. Anyway, we could go on and on about the surveys, but yeah, it's the psychology of that, and abnormal psychology is a great term for it, but I just don't get it. It's frustrating. And the office, the poor meteorologist and TV meteorologists and everybody else have already gone through enough. And the event doesn't end when you issue the last tornado warning. They're going to be living with this for days and weeks and forever in many cases. But the damage surveys can be exhausting mentally and physically after everything you've already been through. And then to have to hear that crap or look at that stuff on social media is just, it's the last thing you need.
Rick, I wanted to say some of your observations that you shared with us by email, I thought were very prescient and probably important for us when we're talking in real time. We've talked about debris fields in the last few weeks after the movie 13 Minutes, how incredibly they reconstructed that debris field for that. But you see some of these pictures in places like Mayfield and Dawson Springs, and you see that looks like, the very same thing. You talked about the importance of preparing for that. So mention what you said in your observations to us.
Yeah, I just was reading accounts and stories of people and, how they reacted when they got the warning and what they did, how they sheltered. And one of the things I took away is so many people, they were either in bed or, kind of in the house for the night, and you're probably not wearing your work boots and your jeans and your, all your clothes like you might normally be. You're just kind of relaxing in the house. So, but I don't know. It's hard to tell people this when you're teaching about tornado safety, but you almost have to kind of tell people, okay, imagine the worst case scenario. Imagine what you're going to be wearing. You could be lying in a muddy field in the cold rain for hours by yourself, or you may have to walk or crawl through that debris field that you talked about, the wood, the splinters, the glass, the fragments of metal, the whatever else is there. You need to kind of think about that as you're getting ready for that warning. And that's why you can't wait until the last second. So if I was going to be at home taking shelter from a tornado, I'd have jeans and boots and long sleeve shirt, and you got to dress for what the worst case scenario might be. So yeah, it's hard to get that across to people because people are reacting in many cases at the very, very last second, and they're in shorts and flip-flops and a t-shirt and whatever they're sleeping in, and it's just like, well, I'm going to go take shelter and this is going to be over with. Well, that may be what you're wearing or what you're having to work with for hours, many, many hours. So, and that was one of the big takeaways I saw. There were other things too about, and I'll shut up after this, but there were several accounts of people that were swept out of their homes, or their homes were destroyed, and they were just kind of either under debris, under rubble, or in some cases just lying out in the woods or in a field after they were thrown out. They were injured, they couldn't move. And so how are you going to let people know you're there? You can only yell so much or so loud, especially if you're hurt. So we always tell people to take a noisemaker into your shelter with you. Now, not the Happy New Year, that kind of noisemaker, but talking about an air horn or something, or for this case, if you could
whistle around your neck. Yeah.
A lanyard, a whistle on a lanyard. Imagine if you could get that and just alert rescuers to know that you're there. And just the fact that you're going to have to be self-sufficient for sometimes many, many hours, because they can't rescue everybody and they can't get to everybody. So it's just preparedness. It's just all the things we talk about all the time. But every time you see an event like this, it reinforces why we tell people to do what we tell them to do.
And I'd kind of like to bring in Dr. Jacobs here. Neil is the acting administrator of NOAA. Just your thoughts on the performance of the National Weather Service during this entire event. You had a pretty unique perspective on that.
I thought it was fantastic. And I think, sometimes I go on like those different forums and stuff, and I see these armchair forecasters and what they say and their lack of understanding of everything that goes into what's being done over at the Weather Service office is, I think, contributes to a lot of their confusion and hate and stuff. And so that part actually kind of bothers me. I wish maybe we did more outreach from the weather community to a lot of these armchair forecasters so they actually could appreciate what goes into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I think from what I can see from my perspective down here, they performed at an amazing level, as did pretty much the entire weather enterprise. And I was going to ask Shane, a couple of questions real quickly before we hit a recorded segment. Did you get any pushback on that EF3 rating in Bowling Green when the final rating came out?
He may have had to go.
Oh, okay.
He dropped off.
I think he's working tonight, but and I always love to ask television broadcasters, if you could go back and do it again, what would you do differently? And it's only been a week or so since this thing happened, but I think for all of us, we all strive to be better, and you can learn by people that have been in the fire. I mean, everybody we've heard from tonight, they have been in the fire. You don't understand what it's like unless you've been in that fire, but you learn things, and we can learn from each other. So just a great discussion here. So if you don't mind, we're going to pause this very quickly. We're going to go to Tony Rice for his report, and we are going to come back, Jen, a couple of quick emails, and we will do picks of the week, and we'll probably kind of do some closing points, because this will be really our last normal type show of the year. So we're going to pause for a second and go to Tony. We're going to come back with some email, picks of the week, and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
2021 was another banner year in space, especially on the Red Planet, where China and the United Arab Emirates successfully sent a spacecraft into Mars orbit. NASA also successfully landed the Perseverance rover in February, touching down within 16 feet of the planned landing spot, bettering the record previously set by the Curiosity rover by more than a mile. Perseverance also deployed Ingenuity, a robotic helicopter that has accumulated more than 30 minutes of flight time. The FAA even named the area around the Perseverance rover Wright Brothers Field, noting this first powered flight on another planet. But when we think back about 2021, one of the topics that will be remembered is space junk. From a Chinese military satellite that was struck by space debris to the Long March 5B booster, which uncontrollably tumbled back to Earth back in May. The astronauts aboard the ISS will certainly remember firing the station's thrusters to raise its orbit by about a mile to avoid debris created more than a decade ago by an anti-satellite weapons test. Russia also raised some eyebrows around the world when its anti-satellite missile test in November turned the defunct Cosmos 1408 surveillance satellite into at least 1,500 trackable pieces of debris. This has spoiled a portion of low Earth orbit for years to come. Another more serious incident happened aboard the International Space Station this year as well, when the entire football field-sized spacecraft did a very unscheduled backflip. This was caused by the newly arrived Russian module, which unexpectedly fired its boosters. Commercial space companies also made headlines in a number of positive and not so positive ways. SpaceX's continued development of its Starship prototype down at its base in Texas, and they also sent a group of 4 civilians into space. Blue Origin sued NASA over a lunar lander contract that had been awarded to SpaceX, while United Launch Alliance is wondering when Blue Origin might deliver the engines that it ordered for its new Vulcan rocket family, already more than 4 years behind schedule. But unfortunately, 2021 is probably going to be remembered as the year the billionaires went to space, or at least got close enough to see it. Elsewhere in the sky, or soon to be streaking through the sky, the James Webb Space Telescope is set for launch at 9:20 a.m. local time this Friday, Christmas Eve morning. That's 7:20 Eastern. The telescope was fueled and set atop a European Space Agency Ariane 5 rocket over the weekend. It's currently folded up like origami in its 18-foot wide payload fairing. In the weeks after launch, it will unfold, spreading out its tennis court-sized sunshield, designed to keep the telescope's sensors cold enough to spot faint infrared energy. The hot side of that sunshield will be a toasty 185 degrees Fahrenheit, while the cold side will remain below 388 degrees below zero. NASA TV coverage starts at 6 a.m. Friday morning. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
I've got a funny suspicion we just might have a little email to read tonight.
Letters. We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
We have several emails, and I'm going to just do 3 tonight, and they're all related to last week's show. First of all, David Jackson from Vancouver, Canada wrote, was listening to WeatherBrains 8:30. I have to agree that we need to find out whoever issued that special weather statement at the Paducah WFO, 2 hours ahead of the Mayfield, Kentucky getting hit. And I agree, let's find whoever issued it and interview them. We know who that was, right? Who was that?
It was Knowles, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Chris
I think
Knowles.
it was Chris Knowles.
Chris Knowles.
Pastor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's been on the show before, and we need to get him back.
Yeah, because that was amazing.
Yeah.
But just was kind of, he was reviewing he was living in Washington, D.C., reviewed information from the derecho, and then he could sense a lot of frustration from us last week, and we did, and we've received a lot of comments on social media and also via email, just support for the show. And I will tell you for myself, I had somebody write to me and want to make sure I was okay because I was pretty emotional about radio, but it was very healing for me to be able to speak about radio with you all and with the WeatherBrains listeners because I don't get a chance to do that. And so it was very healing for me to be able to get that off my chest. And so I appreciate that. The next email I want to read is from Australia. Vonda Franey just watched the show here in Australia, watched about 3 now, and it was excellent. Really needed to hear that chat after the huge tornado episode. Kind regards to you all. I watched mostly Hurricane Track with Mark Sudduth, really liked that, and followed Tim Marshall's Storm Track some time ago. You all are amazing. Take your time. Love and prayers with you all in the United States. So that was really encouraging. And then we received an email from Dawson Springs, Kentucky. Thank you for Monday's podcast. This is from Sandy Poe. I appreciate your concern for our area. My family was blessed that our home was 1.5 miles outside of the damage path in Dawson Springs, but we have survivor guilt. I want to praise the SPC for the spot on forecast. I also want to give a shout out to Jeff Lyons and Byron Douglas of WFIE Channel 14 Evansville. They showed great composure while warning us of impending danger. As you well know, our communities are on a long road to recovery. I enjoy your weekly podcast, and I'm proud to be called a weather geek. So that is from Sandy Poe. So I thought that was really great. And thank you to everybody who's written emails. We'll catch up a little bit more in 2022 on some of the emails. I keep tagging them so I can go back and get those out. But if you have emails for us, you have comments, you have questions, show suggestions for guests, email at weatherbrains.com. And please get on our website too and sign up for our newsletter, which goes out every week. And you can get that Thursday mornings. We'll have one coming out this week, skip next week, and then get right back into it. Great articles, very fun stuff that's coming out from the WeatherBrains crew. So thank you for that.
Let me just say, we had Chris Knowles last on the show in 2014 on episode 452. He was on episode 328 in 2012, but we need to get him back. We'll do that.
Well, you got the database there, James, or just pull that right up.
I do, man.
Yeah.
All right, Bill Murray.
This database that you got that we don't have access to, we want to know about it. So I want to thank Greg for sticking around. I want to thank Bob for sticking around too, because I didn't want you to get away. I wanted to share this after the recorded segments because it's a little more lighthearted, Bob. And what we're talking about tonight is really serious. Usually when Greg comes in, we get a 30-minute and out. It's like when you get dismissed early, because his show is usually pretty compact. But tonight we're going to be close to 2 hours again. But when you were with us, Bob, on show 191 back in September of 2009, you asked if anyone had ever heard Miss Monitor. And JB Elliott immediately said, yes, I know Miss Monitor. And you were kind of incredulous, like, really? But we went on to the next point and didn't explore it. So I thought, I want to go back and see what that remark was about. Of course, it's in your book. That's why I wanted to have you back. So I dug the book out and looked to see who was Miss Monitor and learned about this lady, Teddy Thurman. But it made me want to research this show, Monitor. And James, you probably remember it. It ran for 19 years. It was like a 40-hour radio program every weekend on the NBC radio network. And they had news. They actually had John Chancellor in a police car in Chicago as an early predecessor to the show Cops. They had real weather on Monitor, and Miss Monitor was maybe a little more risque and more Saturday Night Live like-ish. But I listened to this episode from June of 1955, and they kept saying, we're going to the U.S. Weather Bureau in Washington. Well, I couldn't wait for him to get to that part. And so, James, roll clip A, because here's a voice that some of us immediately will recognize.
Hello, Washington. Monitor, here in New York. Morgan Beatty speaking. Coming in to Monitor's hearing range, a Monitor report from San Quentin Prison just before lights out. Music from Hollywood. Droodles from Roger Price. Stargazing. And now to the United States Weather Bureau in Washington.
From late reports just received, it appears that thundershower activity, which has been so prevalent over the northeastern quarter of the nation this afternoon and evening, is beginning to let up, although showers are forecast until shortly after midnight from the eastern lakes region and middle Atlantic states into New England. Some of these thundershowers got a bit nasty this afternoon, with gusts reaching to near 50 miles per hour at Wilmington, Delaware, and Lakehurst, New Jersey. The weather disturbance, which has plagued the eastern half of the country over the weekend, is forecast to move northeastward into eastern Canada, resulting in a slow improvement in weather for the eastern states during the next day or so.
All right. So what's your question here, Bill?
All right. So James Van, you absolutely should know who that voice is.
And you say this was in 1955?
That's right.
Oh, goodness. That was before I was born. How would I know this?
Well,
I mean, I'm old as dirt. That was before
you've heard this voice dozens of times in your life. So play the intro, which I cut out so it would be removed.
Here we go.
This is Bob Ferry from the National Weather Analysis Center.
Wow. I would never in a million years.
Our
guess
MIC
that.
For years. And I
no
just thought that
way.
was awesome.
Gosh. But Bob was the MIC when I came to work in this market in the late 1970s. And, I can start to connect the dots now, but wow, goodness gracious, that's some true.
Well, that's why he was so good to JB to let him do that same type of broadcasting on our NOAA weather radio, in the 70s and 80s, because it was compelling listening back then, even when the weather here was quiet. But I thought you'd enjoy that, James.
That was great. Now, JB broke a lot of rules with weather radio, and I can see that Mr. Ferry would let him do that now. So, all right. So let's go and do picks of the week here. We've been on here for a long time. We've kept our guest for a long time. Neil, you've been up since 3 days ago. Thanks for coming on the show tonight. So as we go to everybody, again, if you got any final thoughts on the December 10th tornado event, or a pick of the week. So Neil, let me just start with you, because you got to get some sleep.
Yeah. So my pick of the week. So I was down in Miami, mostly just fishing, but I did go over to the Hurricane Center for the fish fry, and I ran into Kathy LaPenta at the fish fry with her daughters, and I was like, "Why are you here?" And she said, "Well, we're here for the ribbon cutting," and it was the ribbon cutting and unveiling of the William LaPenta, the Research to Operations Lab. So the Hurricane Center has redone the lab, and it is fantastic. And so that lab is my pick of the week. So big shout out to Ken Graham and Jamie Rome, John Cortinez, Craig McLean, and whoever else had a hand in making that. It was great, and Kathy was thrilled, and that's my pick of the week.
Awesome. Outstanding. All right. And again, for Greg and Bob, I'll give you guys some time to come up with a pick of the week. We'll bring you guys here at the end. Let's go over to Jen. Jen, you got a pick for us this week?
I sure do. Sean Hammond for WJRS is the one who suggested Shane from WDKO, and I'm the weather girl in the afternoons on WJRS. I do the recorded weather. And so I started talking to Sean a little bit more, found out they were having a radiothon, and I was actually able to call in and talk to them about the event with the owner of the company I work for. Their goal in this small community of Russell Springs, Kentucky, was $100,000 to donate to tornado relief. They wrote a check and took it today to Mayfield for $211,492.81. And it is overwhelmed me. After I went, off on a tirade about local radio, and you need to be local, this was just proven that radio is not dead. And Sean actually wrote to me and told me that. He goes, "Jen, radio is not dead." And it really has rejuvenated my love for radio and small communities. And so this was just truly amazing. So my pick of the week is their Facebook page, and specifically to the picture there of them donating to their friends, their fellow Kentuckians in Western Kentucky.
Outstanding. Okay, Jen, great. And again, all these picks will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com. Troy, what's your pick of the week?
I'm going to no link to go along with this. And I know that Greg probably and Neil knows a little bit about this. I know Rick will as well, but in the last couple of weeks, he saluted Louis up at headquarters, his retirement, which is going on. But I think what's amazing to me is we're seeing a lot of retirements in the Weather Service overall at the end of the year. I know that Jim Bellis, Weather Service in Memphis, has retired a long time there in the Memphis area. Joe Ariano at our office in Austin, San Antonio, 45 years of federal service for Joe. And I got to tell you, I'm a little worried about this because we have some vacant positions we have to fill. But at the end of the year, we mentioned Louis, and I would like to salute those people that are deciding to retire now, congratulate them. But let's keep on top of these vacancies and get those filled as quickly as we can, would be the end of the year suggestion. And happy holidays and Merry Christmas to everyone.
Indeed. Thank you, Troy. Kim, what's your pick of the week?
Not to steal from Bob, but Bob, my pick of the week was actually the piece that you wrote contextualizing the severe events of the previous week, and just a wonderful job doing that. Absolutely recommended read.
Awesome. So let's just go to Bob. Bob, give us a good pick of the week.
Well, thanks, Kim. I would have to say NWS folks in general of the crazy weather events of the last couple of weeks. And in particular, I'm a discussion junkie, right? I love reading the forecast discussions, and I'm always looking for superlatives. If it just says significant, I'm kind of disappointed. The word incredible crept in several days before the big event in NWS Boulder, Denver. They talked about the potential for incredible winds, and that got me excited. So I just have to give a shout out to especially the forecasters in the upper Midwest, northern and central plains during the event on Wednesday. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the tornado event, but I think the way they handled the superlatives and the extremes and put them in context and essentially found ways to say we haven't ever seen this before in December in a way, sometimes with a sense of humor, sometimes with just conveying the jaw-droppingness of it. But my hats off to all of them.
Good deal, Bob. Thanks. All right, Greg, what's a good pick for us? I know you got something good.
Yeah, I got a bunch of them, but I'll try to be concise here. There are a couple of other leaders in the National Weather Service that will be departing soon. Eli Jacks, chief of the public program at Weather Service headquarters. Andy Stern, head of Analyze Forecasts branch or portfolio. So yeah, there's going to be some big folks to fill up there at headquarters in the months ahead. Great folks moving on. Pick of the week. Well, it's somewhat personal. Had a great time in Austin. Like I said, want to wish my son and his new bride a great life. They rescheduled their wedding 3 times through COVID, and managed to pull it off this last time in Austin. It was really a tough time to try to get married over the last couple of years, and so they did that. And Austin delivered in the weather department. It was just a stunningly beautiful day. In fact, I think that Sunday was really the only blue sky day the 3 days we were out there. So it was just amazing. But I'll go back to Bob on the storm event in the Midwest. While it didn't make the list on the memories today, my pick of the week would be what the Weather Service has available for real-time analysis data so that we know what's actually going on. And I pull a lot of that information out. It's high resolution data. RTMA and IRMA data are incredibly useful for trying to get to the truth. They're not truth. I'm not saying it's, we have a dilemma in meteorology as to what truth really is, but they're about as close to truth as you can get at the surface for temperature, 10-meter wind speed, and that data set is invaluable. There really isn't anything else like it over the contiguous United States as far as high resolution data for meteorological parameters. So my pick of the week is what the Weather Service is doing with respect to analysis data, ground truth data. I know the modeling is what everybody looks at, but it really has to start somewhere, and that's with the analysis. So we got to keep that going, and it was very, very interesting to watch with the storm event over the middle of the country last week. So that's my pick of the week.
Outstanding. I love it. All right, Bill Murray, go.
Yeah, my pick of the week was one that was lent to me by Kim Kloko McLean this last weekend. And it was an interesting article in the Washington Post, an op-ed in their perspective section of the Capital Weather Gang by Admiral Gallaudet, Kathy Sullivan, Marshall Shepard, pushing for a Weather Act 2.0 that would sort of jumpstart a new Operation Warp Speed for weather and climate that could have a real life-saving impact. And so I quickly gobbled that up and chose it as my pick of the week because I'm very interested in seeing how we can, involve public-private partnerships, where we can to, get the word out. And so that's my pick of the week. And then, of course, Dr. Neal being the smart gentleman that he is with the tremendous insight he has, may or may not have a comment on that after I use that as my pick of the week. And then I'll kind of fill in about what's going to happen on the Christmas Eve show.
I thought it was an interesting article, and I think that it's long overdue for the weather community to sort of do a fair weather report 2.0. So the National Research Council did this, but I think it was published in 2003, and the amount of involvement of the private sector has changed so much. It's really worth sort of figuring out what are the capabilities of the private sector and how they can interact. I'm not sure 100% like whether that would be the best fit for ICAMs. If folks are curious about that, I've got a paper coming out with Kelvin Dropenmeier next month in BAMS on the actual scope of that. But I did think the mix of authors was interesting, but I think they all consult for the same company, so that makes sense.
And so, yeah, that was a very interesting article with a neat underlying story there too. So, James, on Friday, we're gonna have a special show. We're gonna record it at 8 o'clock in the morning. And we have a very special author, Janet Chestnut, who has written a story about the plains and a Christmas blizzard. And she offered it to us, and we gave it to Ken Osborne, a great voiceover professional narrator here in Birmingham. And he has done a fantastic job bringing that story to life. And so we'll get together for a few minutes at the beginning, any of the panelists that can join, and maybe share a cup of hot cocoa or coffee or something, and wish everyone a Merry Christmas. And then we'll play this story, which is just out of this world. And the list of great guests for that are coming ahead starting in 2022 are just amazing. We'll kick off on January 3rd with the young man from New Zealand who has been actually saving lives in California, literally thousands of miles away, working at his computer to pass life-saving fire information to residents of California. And he was profiled in Wired magazine a couple of months ago. And I think his story is just fascinating, and he has agreed to join us in that show on January 3rd. His name is Michael Sylvester, and I think it's going to be a fascinating story. So, James, the list beyond that is just amazing. It's going to be hard to fit any guests in so we can't have anything in your meteorological memories now, at least through March, Greg. So just don't do it. Just cancel them till April.
Wow.
I would love to pause it, but it just keeps going. And as my wife says, it's my shtick. So
it is.
I just have to say, I'm so glad that this isn't going to be 7 brides for 7 brothers. You don't have 7 sons.
Yeah,
They're not- Maybe the world can just have a break.
Yeah, just take a break, take a breather. Yeah, I would like that.
All right. So, and again, let me just say on the Friday Christmas Eve show, we are going to record it Friday morning, but it will roll Friday night at 8 Eastern, 7 Central, as though it were live. So you won't be able to watch it Friday morning. So anybody else got anything to say before we go here? Because we are past 2 hours. But Bob, thank you. Thanks for your time tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
And Greg, as always, thank you. And thanks to everybody for listening. If you're new to the show here, we typically are on the air Monday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. A lot of people watch, but most people listen. We know that. But if you want to watch, it's live.bigbrainsmedia.com. If you want to get in touch with us by email, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. The show notes for tonight's show, including our picks of the week, will be on the website, weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Merry Christmas and God bless.
Remind me to ask you about the red snapper and the drug runners, Dr. Neal.
Oh, I've got some stories that you're not going to believe. I'm not even.
I wanted to get into it tonight, but this was not the appropriate show for it. So we'll have to do it January 3rd.